Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be making a really beautiful pendant. The pattern is going to look something like this guy. But I'm going to do this wrap using this gorgeous little piece of petrified wood. This is from my Sidewinder Minerals collection, and it's a beautiful cabochon, well cut, and a good shape and a nice polish. So let's get started. I always like to straighten my wire before I start working with it, and to do that I use a metal plier. I hold on to one end of the wire, and then I use my nylon jaw. I get a nice handshake grip, and I just run the nylon jaw across the round or square wire that I'm trying to straighten. And mostly what you're doing here is not looking to make the wire straight more than take out the lumps and warps within the wire. You could also just use your fingers and run along the wire to straighten it and take some of the lumps and warps out of it before you start shaping it into the frame. So my wire is looking pretty good. I'm going to find the approximate center of the wire, and I'm going to grip firmly either with my bent nose or chain link plier. And I'm going to use my thumb and just push the wire halves together and make sort of this little hairpin, very tight hairpin turn at the center of the wire. So I'm just going to run my fingers up and make sure that these are a little more straight and not crisscrossed. And then rather than looking at the wire face on like this, I'm going to turn it so that I'm looking at the wire's edge. And I'm going to take my bent nose or chain link plier, and I'm going to hold it really tight just at the bend, probably 1 millimeter or so into the wire, and I'm going to use the front wire and put a graceful bend into it and bring the wire down to horizontal. And you can do this by switching hands, or doing it with the same hand like I'm doing, but basically we're just going to cause a nice soft bend in both wires and get them to what I call a horizontal position. To shape the frame, I like to use these little wooden dowels. I get them from the Home Depot and just cut them down to about these 4 or 5 inches. So anyway, you could use the end of your hammer or whatever. But I'm going to brace the point of the frame I just made, the bottom point, and I'm going to use this dowel and carefully wrap this wire around it to shape it. And the important thing here is that I'm going to make sure, it's a little bit hard under the camera, but where the wires cross at the top, it's important to be center over the bottom tip, so that when you bring these wires together up here to create a bail, your bail won't be listing to the left or to the right, it'll be center. So I'm going to kind of give it a shape like that, and I like to brace my thumb right here and roll these little edges out just a little bit. We're going to have to shape it a little bit more with our hands, but you can see that I've got a nice form going on for my frame. Might be a little bit big, but I can work it down a little bit. So yeah, it's a little bit big, and I'm just going to, with my stone in place, use my hands and do a little bit more shaping. I think that's about right. Pretty happy with that. Yeah. So I like a little flare down here at the bottom on teardrops, and when I hammer this, there's going to be a little bit more space up here at the top. So we should have just a little bit of space around our stone to do some additional, to add some additional wires. Once I have the frame shaped the way I want, let's take a look at it. I need some strategic spacing. So with the point of the stone touching basically the upper portion of the wires, I'm giving myself 2 or 3 millimeters down here at the bottom where I can tie off some wires, possibly add a second stone if I want to, but you should have some comfortable space around the stone so that you can squeeze additional wires or tie wires off there. So this looks about right. I have my wires crossing where I want them, so I'm going to hold that in place, and using my bent nose pliers, I'm not going to let anything move. I'm just going to come right here and I'm going to squeeze where they meet and wiggle to the left and to the right a little bit. And that pretty much gets the wires set side by side. And I can just make tiny adjustments as I need to. And the big important thing is that these two wires are nice and centered above the bottom point. And now let's do a stone check. It fits beautifully and exactly the way I want it to. So I have room around the bottom and sides to bring additional wires into the design. What I like to do after shaping is harden the frame a little bit by doing some strategic hammering. So I'm going to tap the neck of the pendant, which right here, which will become the bail eventually, to just kind of square that off. This is round wire, so I'm not going to change the shape too much. I'm just going to tap it lightly with my chasing hammer to give it some hardness, and also just to take the roundness off of these wires so that when I band them with half round it'll be a little bit easier. So from here I can either band these and then hammer the rest of my frame, or I can go ahead and hammer the rest of my frame while I'm here with my steel bench block. So I'm going to go ahead for the sake of the video and hammer. I like to do what's called flaring. So I'm going to hammer this curve more than the straight areas to give a nice flare to the metal. And I'm using my chasing hammer to do that, my favorite chasing hammer of all time, pasted together with old copper wire. I'm going to hold my wire in place as I hammer, making sure not to get my fingers, and I'm going to strike more on the curve than I am on the straightaways. As I hit the metal, I'm going to pull back a little bit with my hammer to create this nice flaring effect. And now I'm just going to tap at the straightaways to transition my wider metal into my rounder metal. So I'm going to taper this metal. So you can see how that looks. It's a little bit more flared here at the curve, and then has a nice tapering into the rest of the frame. And the same for the bottom. Nicely flared and tapering beautifully into the point of the frame. So I'll just repeat that on this other side now. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. After you hammer, the metal is going to expand slightly, so it'll make the space, the inside diameter, slightly bigger. Not much, but slightly. So sometimes you can work that to your advantage and count on it. So I'm just going to refit my stone and make sure that my frame still looks the way I want to, and I think that's just beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed with the rest of it. Now that I have my wire hammered, I went ahead and sanded all of the face of my frame here while I was off camera. I did switch frames and rocks on you guys, but pretty much it's all the same. This one's just a little bit wider. So the next step would be to wrap these two wires here at the neck of the pendant together and start to build the bail. So I do that with 16 inches of 22 gauge half round wire, and I'm just going to straighten that with my fingers. Half round wire has a flat side, so I'm going to make a little hook at the end here with the flat side on the inside of the bend. I'm going to hook over the neck of my pendant, and the trick to working with the half round is to make sure that things don't twist while you wrap. The flat side of the wire should always stay against the frame. So I'm going to make 3 nice secure little wraps here at the neck. I'm going to use my metal plier and give a couple of taps to get that settled. And now I'm going to continue to wrap this half round for about 1.25 inches up the neck of this pendant. And 1.25 inches will be round enough, long enough for you to make a nice open bail that's appropriate to this size pendant. So as I wrap, I'm going to hold my wire real close to the neck and just guide it with my finger while I turn the frame. It's a lot easier than bringing the wire over and underhanded, because then you run the risk of twisting it a lot less. So after a few wraps, I'll just tap it down, and I'll keep going until I get my 1.25 inch. Making sure my wraps are nice and side by side, making sure that they're not crossing over each other as I wrap, and I'm tapping them down as I work. My half round is staying with their flat side against the frame wire as I wrap. Alright, so off camera I wrapped up my 1.25 inches, and I'm going to go ahead and trim this leading tail off of my half round. I'm going to trim it so that that cut lives right there in the middle of my frame and not falling off of this side. I'll tap it down, and then at the end of your wraps you should have about 3 inches left here, maybe a little bit more, so that we can, once we bend this over, we can use the rest of that half round to tie the two halves together. So this is the front of my frame. This is what I just hammered and sanded. So I've tied these up, and right here I'm going to use my thumb in the middle of these wraps. You could also use a dowel if you want, and I'm just going to use my thumb to start to bend this frame over onto itself, bringing the bare wires straight down the middle to meet the point. And my goal here is to make these two sides of the wraps meet. My fingers can only do so much, so when I get here, I'm going to use my metal plier and just give it a nice tap and bring the two sides together. From here, I can go all the way around the neck with the remainder of my half round a couple of times. Make that nice and tight. Make sure that the wires are not overlapping each other. I might just use my plier to pull it a little tighter. And I'm going to end that wrap here in the front, underneath these two wires. So holding everything at the neck, I'll use my plier and bring my half round through the frame, and I'll wrap it a couple of times really securely so that I can end this half round wire. I'll just trim it here. I'm going to leave about 2 millimeters so that I could fold it inside the frame. These are my bent nose. I'm going to turn the little end, and then I'm going to tap it on top to stuff it inside my frame. And then come over here and tap it down. This way, when I lay my rock on here, all the cuts will be on the inside. Okay, so that's the beginning of my frame, and making sure that my two decorative wires are straight down the middle. Okay everyone, so before I continue, I want to talk a little bit about frames. Obviously, we are shaping our pendant and to go around the stone, but in order for the stone to sit in place, it needs to have a back side. The pendant needs to have a back side. So we can do that in a lot of ways. Sometimes we can run strips of wire from one side of the frame to the other and create a backing for the stone. Sometimes we do continuous wire frames, such as this one. It's a very similar frame to the one we just built, except that instead of cutting the wires off here and wrapping them around, I went ahead and cupped the stone with them, fed them through the frame, and kept them going up the back side of the stone. So this is one 18-inch piece of 18 gauge wire, and it creates the entire frame plus the catch for the stone. This is not a beginner frame, but it's not hard to do. It gives you a lot of flexibility. I use this one a lot because even though it looks like there's a lot of motion, it gives a lot of flexibility for you to adjust, because not all cabochons are completely cut to be calibrated. So in other words, they may slope a little differently or be teardrop shaped like this one, but not 100% symmetrical on both sides. So anyway, beginners, I advise to do this type of backing because it's easy, it's stable, and it doesn't, you don't have to worry about holding on to the stone. You can just worry about the decorative wire. So looking at the frame we just made, my intention is to have these two wires that I brought down the front be the front. So I could back this stone with straight wire. The other way I could actually use this frame is to use these two wires as the back side and bring the wires from the bottom over the top of my stone and then add additional wire. I'm actually going to show us how to attach a square wire and use it for the back side of this frame, and also possibly for some decorative wire, to continue it up for some decorative wire. So I've cut 12 inches of 20 gauge square soft wire, and I'm going to find the middle here of the wire, and my intention is to secure it to the frame, to add it onto the frame. So I'm going to do that in a real easy way by wrapping it first at its middle right here around the neck of my pendant. Take a little pair of pliers and do a very gentle squeeze to cinch that up a little bit. I'm going to bring these two wires through the body of the frame. So I'm going to put a bend on this one to either side of the straight wires. So I'm taking this one through the frame. I'm holding it tight right here so it doesn't get away from the neck. And I'm going to just make a real tight loop, which I can cinch up a little better here in a minute. And I'll do the same with this opposite side. So facing the front of my pendant, just going to bend this wire and bring it through the frame on the opposite side of the two straight wires in the center. And I'm going to make a real tight wrap to get that wire anchored here at the top. Now I can use my pliers and make some adjustments to tighten it all up. Just going to pinch it down right there. And on this side, I'm just going to pinch it down and run them straight up the side of my frame, straight up the side of my bale. Okay. I'll continue this wire around to the back side and help it along with a little pinch. And looking at the back side of my frame, I'm just going to make a bend so that the wire makes kind of a little arc right here. And I'm going to tie it off down here at the bottom of my frame. I want to use this wire later in design, possibly, this continuous part of the wire. So I'm going to loop it and bring it down towards the bottom of the frame. So holding everything steady, I'm going to do a bend over the frame, and I'm going to come out here and arc the wire and push the tip through the frame and help it along and bring it all the way down here into a nice tight loop around the frame. I'll just use my plier and tighten that up a little bit. Use my fingers to straighten that out. If this wire gets too wrinkly on you, you can use your nylon jaw to straighten some of these warps out. Just hold the rest of what you've done in place. Make sure not to pull too tightly and take your frame out of shape, but you can gently rub this wire back into shape with those nylon jaws. Okay? So now I'll take the other side, bring it completely around to the back side of my frame. Use my plier to tighten that up just a smidge. And now I'll do a nice shaping to get it over here to the other side of my frame. I'm going to make sure that it's about the same distance from the tip as this side. That looks about like it's right. I can make some little adjustments later. So I'm going to hold it all in place. I'm going to make a tight bend right there, put a curve on my wire, stick it through the bottom side of the frame and help it through and make a tight loop right there. And before I cinch this second one down, I'm just going to glance and make sure that I'm equal with this side, and I am. So I'll just give that a little pinch with my plier and flatten it out. And then I will use my nylon jaw and straighten this wire out just a bit. You don't want to do that nylon jaw action too much because it does harden the wire as you work, and each time you rub it out with that nylon jaw. So once in a while to get under control is good, but don't overdo that. Okay, so now I have a nice back for my pendant to sit my stone, and I can check the fit, but first I need to raise these rails in the front just slightly. So I'm just going to slide my finger in there and get a raise on those. My stone fits nicely into place there. It has a nice, beautiful back side to it. And now I can work on these decorative wires in the front. So the first thing I wanted to do with these is raise them slightly to make sure that there's room for my stone in between this upper wire and the base of the frame. So I've got them raised, not quite at 45, but slightly. The other thing I'm going to do is fan them out to have them match the angle of the frame on the bottom. So I'm just going to push them from side to side until they kind of ride sideways along the two side rails. And then using my finger here, I'm going to just curve this wire and make it match the curve in the frame. Just using my thumb, and I'm going to bring that wire over to the opposite side. I still have a gap between the upper and lower portion of the frame. So now I'll do the same with this side. I'll just follow the edge of the bottom of the frame and bring my wire around to the opposite side. That looks pretty good. I'm going to make these two look as similar as possible, and I'm going to make them cross down here as center to the point as I can. So I've got them crisscrossed, I've got them curved, and I'm going to slip my stone back into place just to see that they will sit on top of the stone, because eventually they are what hold the stone in place. So I can use my stone, if you can manage to hold it all together, and shape these wires just a little bit more to match the top of my stone. So these wires should catch the upper shoulder of the stone. If they sit too far out, then sometimes the stone slips out, or you don't have, you just don't have the design do what you wanted it to do. So while the stone's in place, I'm going to work this a little bit more. What I'm looking for is evenness between the two sides. My stone is sitting at the center of this pendant, and I've got my nice gaps to either side, all the way around the stone fairly evenly. Okay, I like that. That looks pretty good. So I'll slip it back out. This, by the way, is a Petrified Wood from my Sidewinders collection. It's a beautiful cabochon, very nicely cut, no chips, well edged and highly polished. Beautiful for jewelry making. Okay, so with my wires curved, I could either now go to the next step, which is to drop them down and bring them around, or while they're in this curved position, it's a good opportunity for me to hammer these if I want to do any hammering. How do we hammer while this wire is attached to the frame? I will show you. Once you've made your nice curves, without changing any of the shape, pull the wires back out from the neck. So hold it right here and bend it out so that you can reach this with the hammer. I'll do the same on this opposite side, making sure that nothing shifts and making sure that my curves don't change. Not quite the same, so I'm going to fiddle them. And then I'm going to hammer this little curve from about here to here. Same here, from about here to here. And I'll do that by placing this face down so the back side of my pendant is up. I'll get my bench block out, and holding all things steady, I'll hammer one side at a time. I'm working carefully not to hit anything else, and I don't need a whole lot of hammering, just a little bit on this curve. Okay, you can see that, and on the front it looks like that, and I'll just repeat that on this side. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to return the wires to their positions, carefully putting them back on top of the frame. And what you'll notice when you do that is there's a little bit of bulking that goes on right here. So I can easily fix that by getting my flat nose pliers in here and doing some gentle tapping to reshape these if I need to. Okay, now if I slip my stone back into place, it should look pretty good. And that looks really nice. I've got additional wire ready to go for design here, and I can use the extension of the frame here for design as well. My stone is securely in place because I have a nice clean back for it to ride on.